excuse the gloom, but none may know of this meeting.
Over the last year, we've seen an upward trend in dark fantasy-inspired artwork and posts, buying into borrowed nostalgia into the artistic visions of older generations. Trending on basically every social media platform that I use, including YouTube, are retro depictions of classic fantastical characters like wizards, knights, fairies, and trolls, as well as the ever-present surge of popularity for AI-generated dark fantasy takes on popular video games and movies, often paired with unnaturally beautiful or mortifying undertones. Utilizing icons and the dramatic cinematic effects of the past, these various art forms aim to feed a sense of anemoia in the viewer, which is a nostalgia for a time or place one has never known, or further, romanticizing an era you never lived through. An animated longing for a memory that never was. A powerful tool and emotion to be used by people who aim to farm our attention for clicks. Trends of this nature tend to rise and fall within subgroups on the internet often, be it the backrooms for fans of the horror subgenre or anything else of this nature. It is usually sequestered to the confines of online spaces and dies out quickly. Though, surprisingly, I even know people who have never had any interest in fantasy outside of this recent trend, referencing how much they love the idea of dark fantasy, and claiming that they want to be a wizard in their tower, or die like a knight. This popularity has stuck around and climbed out of the web of social media and crept into the real world. I first saw this nearly a year ago now, and I'm still getting this content recommended to me regularly. Why? Altogether, it seems strange. It's been a long time since dark fantasy had the stage light. Media has been shifting in an opposite direction for decades now. Culture has been drifting away from this style and method of storytelling, swapping it out for a brighter canvas and, to put it simply, family-friendly stories. The trend itself doesn't even feed off of modern culture, as the most popular depictions are tied to titles such as 80s dark fantasy or retro. So, what is influencing this shift? I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, though. In order to take a look at dark fantasy, we must first know exactly what I'm referencing. Dark fantasy is widely defined as a subgenre of fantasy which focuses primarily on tones of horror and the macabre. Imagine dark castles and tombs, armies of dead, dark magic, smoking potions and poisons, and, of course, monsters. Taking a look at some of the popular dark fantasies out there, this becomes evident. Throughout the film Dragon Slayer, an 80s classic, though dated, the viewer is constantly reminded of the desperation and evil the characters are facing via the use of a dark color scheme, untrustworthy characters and faces, and jaded cinematography. The antagonists in the popular video game The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion are essentially demons and hell itself, trying to destroy the planet. And of course, the most well-known is The Lord of the Rings, which is full of frightening depictions of the dead, the greedy, the disgusting, and the powerless. As mentioned before, these themes have been dying away in media for quite some time. Depictions of death and suffering are no longer deemed suitable, as most audiences shy away from harsh realities, giving way to more unrealistic portrayals of action. It almost seems as though the general public is not interested in fantasy altogether anymore, as many consider it nerdy and weird. But that's not necessarily true. Fantasy is still popular, it just often has a much more hopeful and colorful depiction. We see these little guys in Zelda, which is incredibly popular, and stuff like this in games like Final Fantasy. Even the most popular fantasy series like The Elder Scrolls, which I mentioned a moment ago, have shifted away not from the fantastical itself, but from the darker themes. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim is a great fantasy game, but although it has dragons and the dead, It seems a very far throw from what anyone could consider dark fantasy. There has been a systematic muddying of the waters where depictions of the truly dark are being shunned, though not very long ago, in the early 2000s, all fantasy tales, even those for children, had darker themes, while currently there is seemingly nothing new coming out that I'd consider a true dark fantasy. Despite that, we're strangely seeing a rise of interest in its themes. Sure, you can, and many do, attribute this fact to the rise and fall of interest in culture. As times and political ideals shift, the media follows, painting a unique vision onto past ideas, even going so far as to dig up and repopularize old trends. But personally, I feel the truth lies much deeper. This past month, I've been diving into older media. I've been playing an old video game called Daggerfall, which leans heavily into dark fantasy elements, watching movies from the 80s, as well as rewatching the oldest Disney movies. Movies that I don't even remember watching as a kid because it was just so long ago. The difference between these older movies and games, and the content that is currently being released, even by the same studios, is stark. I mentioned earlier that older movies have gruesome depictions of death, and the villains are palpably evil. One movie in particular stuck out to me, Sleeping Beauty. If you haven't watched this film, or don't remember it well, as strange as it sounds, it is actually a fantastic dark fantasy. The movie climaxes in an epic battle after Prince Philip is granted the Sword of Truth and the Shield of Virtue. He rides to save the princess who he loves, but Maleficent, the villain, attempts to stop him. And in the face of his victory, she transforms into a dragon and screams in despair.
Now shall you deal with me, O prince, and all the powers of hell!
In the end, the prince triumphs, quite literally blocking hellfire with the Shield of Virtue, and slaying the force of hell itself and all evil with the Sword of Truth. There's some pretty intense messaging and lessons for children to be learned there. When watching that scene, I was not only taken aback by how alien it was to see something like that in a kid's movie, which I totally think we should bring back, by the way, but I was also inadvertently directed to a realization. The definition of dark fantasy I've known all these years wasn't right. Dark fantasy isn't simply aesthetic or thematic, as it is often defined and as I defined it a moment ago. It doesn't solely depend upon the presence of fear and horror, but it primarily relies upon the presence of true good and evil, carefully highlighting the struggle between the two. All of the examples I mentioned ago illustrate this fact. The movie Dragon Slayer is about slaying an evil dragon, and deeper than that lies commentary about man's hubris and the effect of selfishness. One of the movie's most impactful scenes highlights this as a Christian priest attempts to stop the dragon, but in this struggle he fails and is burnt alive in what can be viewed as hellfire. The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion isn't about the forces of evil. Its story is in overcoming that evil and saving the world. And of course, The Lord of the Rings, the classic, depicts the epitome of simple good, that being kind-hearted hobbits, facing an evil that is simply impossible to imagine. In dark fantasy, evil is overwhelming. It is often permeating everywhere, corrupting, killing, and most importantly, it is winning. There is always, though, the forces of good to fight back, however small and destitute, ever unyielding. In particular, within the good lies hope. We have all dealt with the cliché of hope our entire lives and have grown ill and bored of the concept, but what is hope truly, before it was boiled down out of its essence by Hollywood's machine? Hope is defined as a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. It may be foolish of me to do this, but I disagree with the dictionary on this one. In many situations, I admit that definition is suitable. I can hope that this video gets a lot of views, for example, but that is a selfish hope. It is tied to me and what I want for myself. I think that there is a difference between that selfish kind of hope and what is true hope. True hope isn't believing or wanting, it is knowing. Knowing in your heart that the forces of good and love exist, even in the face of the darkest evil. Hope isn't something that you make up when you expect or want something to happen. That is a modern corruption of the essential idea. Hope behaves more as a permeative force that if you clear your mind, you can simply feel. In The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf carries one of the 3 elven rings of power, named Narya. Narya isn't mentioned in the films, but it has a fundamental impact on the story. Narya has the ability to inspire hope among those around the one who wields it. This is the reason that the Fellowship was able to unite and march and believe that their small band could possibly take on the massive force of Mordor and Sauron. This fact seems an essential part of the story. It's too important of a detail for Tolkien to just have simply thrown it in on a whim. It is crucial to the story. It wasn't just a group of people who overcame Sauron. It was a prevailing force of hope that united the good and led them to victory. As the world is changing and modernizing, we're shifting away from the old black and white depictions of heroes and villains. Modern villains often have an understandable motivation, a reason to be evil that you can relate to and even sympathize with. And I'm not here to harp on this, as it isn't a wholly bad thing. I think it's important to understand what is different from ourselves. In almost all conflicts that we'll personally encounter, I can even claim that it is 100% necessary to approach things with understanding in mind, as it is often the only thing which will lead to a better world and outcome. I say it isn't wholly a bad thing, though, because I do believe that true good and evil do exist. And it seems that many people no longer believe that, which is why dark fantasy is dying. Even the villain Maleficent I mentioned earlier, who called upon the literal forces of hell in her first movie, has been given a backstory in newer films, a reason to be foul. People are now prone to throw away any sort of hope or faith in something greater than themselves. Many go so far as to call anyone who believes in such things as childish or superstitious. And the point of love and good is misunderstood everywhere. Depictions of brotherly love, as seen with Frodo and Sam, are misclassified as gay by younger audiences because so many in the modern day no longer know how to truly love a friend or the people around them. So any evidence of care is simply mistaken for romance. We have no more stories about good and evil. The words themselves echo in hollow shells of their former meaning, a meaning lost to time. I'm not here to make any sort of religious commentary, but I will ask, where does that lead us? What kind of world is that which has no defined morality or ethics? Recognizing evil for what it is crucial in life, and the essential goal of all dark fantasy. So I ask, as our culture shifts away from dark fantasy and depictions of hope, the fight against true evil, where do we end up? What do we have as a society and a people once hope dies? The reason this theme has been trending in recent years isn't just because people are fascinated by the scary and cool themes of dark fantasy. It is because dark fantasy lends us something to believe in. What we are all begging for in life is to know that what we are doing is right, which is all we can ever ask for. It is why so many young people are so enthralled by the scene of a knight dying. It goes hand in hand with the joke I keep seeing everywhere online, which goes something along the line of, "When I say I'd do anything for you, I meant fight dragons and journey across the earth, not get a job and pay taxes." In the modern world, we have so few answers, so few promises that what we are doing is truly right. We are told from a young age to define what is right to ourselves, and then, for the rest of our lives, we will doubt our every action as soon as we make that decision. Our culture is shifting away from love as hookup culture becomes prominent. Our children are growing up in a world where evil and villains can always be understood, and the good isn't necessarily so. So, individually, we are left asking who we are, why we are, and of course, what to do. A battle that many lose and replace with distractions. Hence, many would rather die as a knight, broken on a battlefield, but knowing that they did everything they could to preserve what is good and beautiful. Dark fantasy is knowing what is good and what is evil, and devoting our entire being and even our life for something that we believe in. That isn't something that we should ever let go of. I hope that you have enjoyed this video. Before I go though, I want to thank my newest member. Aspartus, you are a legend. For now, I've been Sir Schmidt. I hope you all have a beautiful day. Until next time.